No one teaches a mother how to bury her own child with bandaged hands, or how to hide the pain underneath a nurse's uniform. But that's what the war forced me to do. My name is Lillian Mayweather. I'm 89 years old, and I live alone in a small house, surrounded by white rose bushes I planted myself, with hands that once held syringes, discharge papers, and bodies far too cold for their age. I was a nurse during the Korean War, then in Vietnam. But what destroyed me wasn't the blood of strangers. It was the familiar face among the corpses. These days, my feet swell in the cold, and my arms can't carry what they used to. But inside me, there's still a battlefield, full of trenches carved out by silence. If you've ever lost someone who meant the whole world to you, if you feel like you still carry a secret no one ever noticed, then this story is yours too. Stay with me until the end. Sometimes the only thing that saves us is hearing from someone who survived. There are things we stitch into our clothes, and others we stitch straight into our soul. I remember the first time they handed me a crisp white apron, smelling like ironing spray and wrapping paper, folded like a secret, and they said, "Stitch your name on the chest, so they'll know who's taking care of them." Back then, I was in my early 20s, head full of promises I didn't yet know how to keep. I was a freshly trained nurse, hands shaking from fear, but eyes hard, like someone who learned early on never to look fragile. My name is Lillian Mayweather, Lillian with 2 L's, just like my grandma always reminded everyone in the neighborhood. Lillian with 2 L's, 'cause the world has to learn twice to respect a black woman. But there, in that medical camp at Fort Jackson, no one cared how many L's were in my name. When they handed me the needle, black thread, and the marked patch of fabric, I hesitated. The other girls finished in minutes. I sat there, stitching slowly, because it wasn't just a name. It was the start of my silence. Every stitch I made was like a knot in my throat. I knew from that point on my name would be on the front lines, but not my heart. My heart had to stay locked in the apron's pocket. The uniform was light-colored, easy to stain, hard to clean. It meant more than work. It was both shield and prison. It said, "This woman is on duty." And back then, being on duty meant you had no right to ask questions. Not about politics, not about absurd orders, not about the bodies that arrived nameless and hopeless. I stitched Lillian. Just that. Not Mayweather. Because there, last names carried weight, and my ancestors had carried too much already. I chose to be just Lillian, the black girl with deep eyes and steady hands, the one who didn't cry, the one who knew how to boil water, check pulses, wrap shattered legs. No one knew I had a little boy back home, left in the care of a cousin. No one knew that while I was treating soldiers screaming out for their mothers. I was a mother who couldn't scream for her son. In war, you learn real quick what gets prioritized. And sadly, a mother's love isn't a priority in a field hospital. At least, not when you're the nurse. That embroidery, I redid it so many times, with different threads, on different uniforms. Sometimes I used just initials. Other times I insisted on writing out the whole name, like I was trying to convince myself I still belonged to me. But over time, I stopped. I started wearing the nameless aprons, the ones with no ID, the ones that came straight from the supply room with a yellowed tag. It was easier to be nobody. Being nobody hurt less. Being nobody let me watch everything and keep breathing. Being nobody saved me from guilt. But even when the apron had no name, the blood always knew me. It was like it recognized that behind that rough cloth, there was a woman who'd once been a girl, and who would one day be nothing but silence. There was one night when, for the first time, I had to embroider someone else's name. A young soldier, unconscious. His body was fine, but his memory was gone. They asked me to write his name on his clothes. My hands trembled, because that name, it was too familiar. It was my son's name. Same 3 names, same features, same skin color. But it was another boy, another body, another fate. Right then, I decided I would never stitch another name onto fabric again, because an embroidered name gives the illusion of permanence, and in war, permanence is a luxury. We cling to names like we're hanging onto branches in a flood. But what really stays is the stain. What sticks is the pain. Years later, I found one of my first aprons in an old cardboard box, the fabric already dingy, edges frayed, and there, my name was still stitched in. Lillian, with 2 L's, like my grandma whispering, "Don't forget who you are, even when the world tries to erase it." But in that moment, staring at my name, all I could think of was who I had lost. I thought about my son's name. I wondered if anyone, ever, had stitched his name into a uniform. I wondered if, when he fell, he knew the name of the woman who raised him. And that's when the silence put itself on me for the first time. Like a uniform you never take off. Like a scar stitched into your skin from the inside. Because being a nurse in the war is so much more than wrapping wounds. It's learning to stitch your own name, even when your soul is already in shreds. No one prepares a mother for war. And I'm not talking about the one they report on the radio. I'm talking about the other kind, the one that starts inside your chest. Because when a child is born, you think about rocking them to sleep, not burying them. But my boy's crib never knew peace. He was born into orders, silence, and broken promises. And without meaning to, what should have been a refuge turned into a trench. I was 22 when I found out I was pregnant. Not by a husband, not from a sweet love story. By a sergeant. Married. White. The kind of relationship that wasn't just forbidden. It didn't even exist between the lines. And I knew it. But some things you feel before you understand. And back then, I still believed love was enough. It wasn't. When I told him, he went quiet. Long, heavy silence. Then he said, "You know this can't exist," and walked out. That was the last time I saw him. The child stayed. The man didn't. I carried that pregnancy like a crime. I stitched my apron over my belly, buckled my belt high, pretended stomach aches to explain the nausea. War taught me how to hide wounds, but motherhood taught me how to hide hope. My boy was born on a sticky night, inside a borrowed trailer behind the base. Rose helped me, a nurse and a friend who swore to keep my secret till the end. She cut the cord with a pair of medical scissors and handed me that tiny warm bundle that cried like he already knew everything. I held him like I was trying to hold the whole world in my arms. I gave him a strong name, Evan. It means God is gracious. But in that moment, all I wanted was for him to live. Not for God. For me. In the first months, I split my chest between nursing and anxiety. By day, I was a nurse. By night, a mother, terrified someone would find out. The base didn't allow children. And a black woman with an illegitimate child. The only thing waiting for me was discharge. Rose was the one who said, "Send him to your cousin in Alabama." I cried for days, but I did it. I put my baby on a train, wrapped in a white blanket with a handwritten note. And I asked my cousin to tell everyone the boy was hers. It was the only way to protect him. And protect myself. The crib was empty. But inside me, it stayed full. Full of milk, full of longing, full of guilt. I kept caring for other people's children. healing boys around the same age as him, wrapping knees, holding feverish hands, napping between shifts with the smell of ointment stuck in my nose. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the way he held my finger with his wrinkled little hand, the look that seemed to ask, "Are you coming back?" I did go back. Years later. He was 6 by then. He called my cousin Mom and thought I was some distant aunt. I smiled, hugged him, bought him a gift, and left that same night. Because the truth is, the love I had didn't fit in the world I was given. Too much to hide, not enough to hold on to. And still, I kept going, kept sending money, kept writing letters I never signed as Mom, kept stitching my silence into the uniform. Time turned the boy into a young man. I watched from afar. Black and white photos, report cards, brief phone calls. And every time I heard his voice, I wanted to say it. I wanted to say, "It's me. I'm the woman who gave birth to you. I'm the nurse, and I'm your mother too." But I never did, because it was too late, because he already belonged to another home, and because the war still wasn't over. Not the one outside, not the one inside. When he turned 18, I got a letter saying he had enlisted. My heart dropped straight out of my chest. I stood for hours holding that paper like it might explode. His name, the fake last name, the shaky signature. Every piece of it was a reminder that I had failed. I raised him to survive, and he chose to walk into death, not knowing the war had already taken too much from me. I went to the medical post and requested a transfer. I begged to be assigned to the same unit he'd be serving in. A lie. Maybe. But it was also instinct, a mother's desperation. And that's how, years later, my eyes saw him again. Tall, steady, handsome, so much like me, and yet so far away. He called me ma'am, spoke to me with professional respect, and I smiled as a nurse, not as a mother. My son's crib had turned into a trench, and I was forced to watch, unable to pull him out, unable to scream, "Get out of there, son! This isn't for you!" Because silence was already part of my bloodstream, and in that trench, all I could do was wait for the worst. Or maybe, just maybe, a miracle. But war, my dear, war doesn't hand out miracles for free. Some words weigh heavier than silence. And when they come from the mouth of someone you gave birth to, they don't just hurt, they shatter. The first time my son called me ma'am, it felt like he buried me alive. And I, wearing my nurse's uniform, smiled. As if it were normal. As if I hadn't spent 20 years waiting for the moment he'd say, "Mom." That day was dry, with the smell of hot metal and grease spread across the campgrounds. I was off shift already, sorting through the end-of-day paperwork when I heard a name shouted at the infirmary entrance. Not his real name. The other one. The name he grew up with. Not the one I gave him, but the one I let them use to keep him safe. I looked up on instinct. It was like someone breathed my soul back into my chest. There he was. My son. Uniform stained, head shaved, the eyes of a grown man who'd never been a child. He walked in with 3 other soldiers, all young, all half clumsy, half invincible. He didn't notice me right away, but I saw him with every part of my body. My skin knew it was him before my eyes confirmed it, and my heart, used to beating slow for survival, started pounding again like it did during labor. He came up with a chart in his hand and said, "Ma'am, one of our guys has a high fever. Can he be seen now?" Ma'am. Not Mom, not Aunt. Ma'am. The word just hovered there between us like God forgot to breathe air into the scene. I looked at him the way someone looks at their own reflection in a mirror that doesn't know it's reflecting. And I answered with the same voice I'd used for hundreds of soldiers before him. "Of course, soldier. Bring him to tent too." He nodded slightly in thanks, and I turned around quickly. Too quickly. So he wouldn't see the tremble in my eyes, the way my jaw was dropping, the collapse trying to scream. Inside the tent, I prepped the cot with surgical precision, followed every protocol, pulled down the sheet, laid out the instruments. But inside, I was just a mother, knees buckled deep in her soul. He came in supporting his friend, knelt by the bed, holding his buddy's hand, and said, "Hang in there, Jerry. The nurse is going to take care of you." The nurse, he meant me, without knowing, without imagining. I checked the kid. Fever close to 104, pulse racing, infection. I started fluids and antibiotics. He watched me the entire time, curious, like my face was whispering something to him. But it wasn't, because time erases even the most intimate features when the truth gets buried too soon. He didn't know who I was, but I knew everything about him, even the scar behind his left ear, the one he got at age 2 when he fell from the kitchen chair. His scent was the same, that mix of warm skin and childhood sweat. Even there, in combat gear, boots caked in dirt, big hands. He was still my baby. When I finished the procedure, he came closer. He said respectfully, "Thank you, ma'am, really. You were quick. You were steady. We need more people like you around here." I wanted to say, "You don't know how long I've waited to hear your voice." I wanted to say, "It's me, son. It's me, Lillian, the woman who carried you for 9 months and all the years after." But the silence spoke louder. I smiled and replied, "That's what we're here for, soldier. Take care of yourself, too." He stood there a second longer, looked into my eyes, like he was searching for something. And I almost broke, almost. But war teaches us that some gestures have to die before they're born. And in that moment, a mother's love was a risk, a secret that could cost us what little sanity we had left. After that, he came back a few more times, always calling me ma'am, always with that same respectful, distant, formal tone. And I kept building scenes in my mind, wondering if he ever dreamed of the woman who brought him into the world, if he ever missed a hug that never came, if he found it strange how I took a little longer, a little softer to care for him. But I never asked, never dared, because loving in silence was all I knew how to do, and being a nurse was the only way left for me to be a mother without being found out. Eventually he stopped coming. His unit was transferred, and I was left feeling like I had lost him for the second time. The first was when I put him on that train at 2 months old. The second was when he looked at me and called me ma'am. And the cruelest part was realizing in that moment that he admired me. But the way you admire a stranger, and maybe that's what tears a woman apart the most, being important to someone, without that someone knowing just how much of you lives inside them. In war, bullets kill the body, but it's the words that kill the soul. And that word, ma'am, was the quietest bullet I ever took. I was never good with spoken words, always afraid that if I said too much, someone might hear what I felt. But writing was different. It was like stitching thoughts with a fine thread. And that's how I began to speak to him, on paper. While the world saw me as a nurse, I allowed myself to be a mother, only between hidden lines. The first letters I wrote in the silence of the night, with the dorm lantern turned down low, and the pen I inherited from Rose, my shift partner and friend. "My dear Evan," I'd begin, even though I knew he called me by another name, even though I knew, to him, I was just a distant woman who sent gifts and the occasional smile. I wrote after every shift, like someone saying prayers. I told him about the soldiers I treated, the Korean children who came looking for Band-Aids like they were candy, the rainy nights that made me remember the sound of milk boiling in my grandmother's kitchen. But more than anything, I wrote so I wouldn't go mad. Because silencing a mother's love is like trying to hold back the tide with a teacup. Sooner or later it spills over. I kept all the letters folded, tied with a brown cord I pulled from my Bible. I couldn't let anyone see them. Around there, any paper out of place was a red flag, and no secret survives without a hiding place. That's when I found the loose lining in the suitcase they gave me when I arrived at the field hospital in Seoul. One of those hard green canvas bags with a rusted zipper and the smell of mold and desperation. I gently peeled back the fabric and created a false bottom. There, between clean socks, extra syringes, and instruction pamphlets, I buried my heart on paper. The suitcase became my vault, my confessional, and my tomb. With every letter I wrote, I felt more alive, but also more absent, because writing to someone who doesn't know they're yours is like tossing bottles into the ocean with no address. Sometimes I dared to speak my heart. Today I imagined what your face would look like if you knew the truth. I wrote one night after seeing him pass by the infirmary with his unit. In another letter I wrote, "If you ever feel someone looking at you too tenderly, for no reason, maybe that's me." I knew I'd never send any of them, but I had to write them. Not for him, for me, because every nurse learns to soothe other people's pain, but no one teaches us what to do with our own. Those letters were my way of not screaming, of not smashing the steel trays, of not punching the tent walls when he called me ma'am. They were the only language I had left between instinct and surrender. One night, during a nearby bombing, the tents shook like fevered skin. I grabbed the suitcase in a panic, held it like a child. I curled up behind one of the cabinets, while the shrapnel burst in the distance, not out of fear of dying, but fear of losing those letters. Because you see, my dear, those pages were everything I had as a mother. There was no birth certificate, no photo of us together, no spoken memories. Just those words that would never be read. Evan was growing up and I kept writing. I wrote about how he walked, even without knowing, about how his laugh might sound, about how his voice might say, "Mom," even if he never did. The letters became portraits I never had, and every time I reread them, I felt like I was rebuilding our story in a parallel world where I had the right to exist for him, where I could touch him without fear, where the crib still existed, where time didn't separate us by duty, rank, or silence. One afternoon I had to hide the suitcase in a rush. A superior came in to inspect the infirmary and ordered a search of personal belongings. I shoved the suitcase under my folding cot and lay on top of it, pretending to have a fever, trembling inside, not from fear of punishment, but terrified that someone might read even a single line, because love kept in silence is as fragile as wet paper. If the wrong eyes find it, it dissolves. After that day, I wrote more slowly, less often. I began to write less about him and more about myself, about how it felt to grow old among the dead, about how my soul wore bandages too, about how war made me a mother twice, once in flesh, once on paper. I never had the courage to give him those letters, and I never had the courage to burn them. So they stayed with me, like the secrets we don't want to kill, but can't allow to live either. When the war ended, or at least that one, I took the suitcase with me. I never unpacked it, left it in a corner of the room like a part of the body that won't heal. From time to time I still open it, read a letter, cry what I can, and close it again. The lining is still there, stitched with dark thread, tight, like it's reminding me that some wounds aren't meant to heal. They're meant to be carried. Evan never read a single word. But if there's something greater than this world, maybe he felt it. Maybe somewhere between time and the unspoken, those letters touched his soul, like a whisper that crossed through war, like a voice with no name, but full of love. Most of the wounds I treated in the war came covered in blood, mud, or gunpowder. You could tell where it hurt just by looking. But there are other wounds no one sees. That don't leak, that don't spill, that don't burn on the outside. And yet, they destroy everything inside. The deepest wound of my life didn't bleed. It wore a uniform, had brown skin like mine, my father's nose, and my grandmother's eyes, and a name that I never had the right to say out loud. It was on a heavy, humid morning that I heard the base radio announce the casualties from the day before. 3 names. 2 meant nothing to me. The third, I froze. I had a syringe in midair, giving a penicillin shot. A sergeant called out to me, but I didn't hear him. His name was there, but with a different last name. The one borrowed from my cousin. The name I allowed him to carry. To protect him from me. The world started spinning in slow motion, as if time hesitated for just a second. And in that pause, my whole body understood. My son had been hit. I ran across the base like a lost soul, rushed through hallways, skipped protocol, didn't wait for clearance. My uniform soaked in sweat, my head ringing, my heart pounding like it knew it was late. I reached the triage tent, and there he was, lying on a cot, unconscious, pale face, shallow breaths, skin burning with fever, a bullet to the abdomen. Wound closed in a rush, bleeding under control, but high risk. I was taken over by something primal, the same instinct that makes a mother wolf chew off her own leg to free her cub. I knelt beside him and whispered, "Evan." But he didn't answer. Another doctor was on duty. But I begged to be the one to treat him. Said I knew the case. A lie. I didn't know anything beyond what love had told me in silence. I started the procedures, cleaned the incision site, changed the IV, re-administered the antibiotics, checked his temperature, prayed with my hands. And all I could think was that this might be my last chance to touch him as a mother, even if he never knew. While I cared for his wounds, mine opened wider. Because seeing your child between life and death, and not being able to call him mine, is the cruelest form of helplessness. On the 3rd night, he woke up, looked around, confused, saw me, smiled and asked, "Ma'am, how long was I out?" "Ma'am." Again. The knife went in all over again. I answered with a nurse's calm. But inside, I was screaming. For 3 days, I watched his recovery closely. Stayed up all night, monitoring every breath. Held his hand without too much pressure, afraid he'd feel the desperation in my touch. Told quiet jokes. Told stories of soldiers who made it. Told everything. Except the truth. And he listened closely, with respect, with a tenderness I didn't expect. Maybe deep down, some invisible thread still tied him to me. Maybe blood recognizes blood. On the 4th morning, he took a sudden turn. Seizure. Respiratory arrest. They called for backup. Chaos took over the tent. Orders shouted, instruments crashing, lights flickering. And I was there, hands on his chest, trying to bring back what the world was trying to take. I screamed inside. But on the outside, I was a nurse. Followed protocol, kept time, wrote down the time of death, the hour the world ended for the 3rd time. I didn't cry then. didn't let myself. Finished the records, closed his eyes with trembling fingers. And then I went for a walk. Had no idea where I was going. Walked for miles across the base, like movement could stitch back what had been torn. It felt like someone had ripped out my womb again. But without anesthesia, felt like the bullet that struck him had gone through my entire body too. I came back to the tent at nightfall, and there he was, his body covered, a white sheet pulled over, only his foot showing, with a tag tied to his toe. A name. That wasn't mine. I knelt beside him, held his cold hand, and whispered what I'd never said in life. You were mine, even if you never knew. And in that moment, a single tear fell. Just one. But it was enough to open the wound. The one that doesn't bleed. The one no one sees. The one only a mother understands. I went to my suitcase, opened the lining, took out one of the letters, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it under his shirt, close to his chest, like a final comfort. And I said goodbye. The war went on. Days passed. Other soldiers came. Other deaths, other screams, other files. But inside me, that tent still exists, that cot is still occupied, and that wound still hasn't healed. Some things you don't say out loud, some truths only dare to come out in a whisper, because speaking too loud scares them off, and speaking too late kills something inside. That morning, I whispered, but he didn't understand. Or maybe it was no longer possible to understand. It was just before the end, his body still warm, but already giving in. Cold hands, eyes drifting somewhere between fever and delirium. I was there, sitting beside him. The whole world seemed to be hanging from the ceiling of the tent, waiting on my decision. And I needed to speak, even if only in a whisper. I'd woken in the middle of the night with a feeling. You know that weight in your chest, right before the radio brings bad news? It wasn't the same anxiety as other nights. It felt like my own blood was calling me. I ran to the tent. He was restless, burning up again. Heartbeat irregular, mumbling names that didn't connect. I called for help, reviewed the vitals, started a new protocol. But nothing was holding him inside that body. It was like he had already started to leave. And I couldn't bear the thought of him going without knowing. I sat beside him, took his hand, and for the first time, I let my heart speak, even if I was terrified, even if it was already too late. Evan, it's me. My voice came out like thread, soft, timid, but true. My son. It was the first time I ever said that, in over 20 years. The first time the word son left my mouth and landed where it belonged. But he didn't react. His eyes were half open. He was whispering something about childhood, about running in a yard, about birthday cake. I pressed my forehead against the edge of the cot and said it again. Evan, it's me, your mother. Silence. Like the world had leaned in to listen. Like, for one moment, even war stepped aside. He slowly turned his face, looked at me with unfocused eyes, and said just one word. Ma'am? Ma'am. Again. My name. Unspoken. My identity. Erased. My story. Choked into a single question mark. I shook my head, held his face with trembling hands, ran my thumb across his damp temple, and said again, I've loved you since the moment I heard your first cry. You were my joy and my pain, and even if you never knew, I've been your mother in silence, all your life. He smiled faintly, like someone hearing something beautiful without quite understanding, like someone saying thank you, by instinct. And then he closed his eyes. He didn't die right then. He stayed for a few more hours. But after that whisper, I knew goodbye had already begun. His wound, treated with precision, stayed closed. There was no visible bleeding, but inside his organs were failing, as if his body was trying to shield his soul to the very end, as if death, just this once, was being gentle. I stayed there. No uniform, no role, no duty. Just a woman. Just a mother. I repeated the whisper, even softer, almost inaudible, as if I were saying it to myself. My son. Forgive me. For the silence, for the distance, for the love disguised as professionalism, for the letter never sent, for the crib that stayed empty, for the arms that couldn't hold you. But he was already gone. A fellow nurse rushed in, calling me to help another patient. And I went, with my body, because my soul stayed behind. I came back a little later, and he wasn't breathing anymore. They said it was peaceful, no pain, no struggle, just rest. I wanted to believe that, wanted to believe that whisper, even if not understood, had crossed some invisible line between us, that somewhere deep in the fever he had felt it, that he had known the woman with the apron and warm hands was more than just a nurse. She was home. She was origin. She was root. But there are no guarantees in war. Not about deaths, not about whispers. His body was taken away soon after. Wrong tag, wrong name. No story. And I stayed there. Same chair. Throat dry, eyes wet. Feeling that more than death, what destroyed me was the gap between what I was and what I could never be. The whisper he didn't understand was my only confession, my only attempt to tear through the veil of silence that had covered me for so many years. But late confessions have that problem. They don't change the past. They just carve deeper into the present, and ever since, I live with that echo inside me. A sentence that never found a home, a truth with nowhere to land. And every time someone calls me ma'am, I remember the boy who looked at me, never knowing who was looking back. The war ended many times, in newspapers, on the radio, in ceremonies filled with medals, trumpets, and speeches about victory. But inside me, it never ended, because some wars aren't made of bombs and flags. They're made of memories that never get buried, of pain that won't stay quiet, and of silences that outlive every explosion. After he died, I kept going, kept showing up for shifts, kept taking care of others, kept cleaning other people's wounds while mine festered in secret. I never asked for leave, never wrote a report, never cried in front of anyone. Because being a nurse in the war didn't give us the right to fall apart. You had to stay on your feet, even when your heart had already collapsed to its knees. The days that followed felt like walking through an emotional minefield. Any gesture, any word, any smell could make me crumble. A young man coughing the way he used to. A medical chart with a similar name. A folded uniform left on an empty cot. I went back to the suitcase, opened the lining. The letters were still there, asleep in the worn fabric. I pulled one out, read it out loud, like he was still there. Like maybe, finally, he could understand everything. But my voice broke, because now there was no one left to write to. I thought about burning the letters, giving them a symbolic funeral. But I couldn't, because even though they hurt, they were all I had left as a mother. And that's when I understood. The war that started on the battlefield had moved inside me. It took over my chest every time someone asked if I had kids, and I answered with an empty smile. It showed up every time I received a generic condolence letter about a soldier with no known family. It exploded inside me whenever I saw a boy with his eyes, the same tilt of his shoulders, the same voice saying, "Yes, ma'am." My body carried the marks of war like any other veteran, but my medals weren't visible, and my scars weren't on the skin. At night, I barely slept. The sound of planes flying over the camp blended with the echo of his cries the day I put him on the train. I had nightmares where he looked at me, wounded, and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" And I had no answer. By day, my hands knew what to do. Muscle memory took over. Compress, IV, dressing, report. But my heart had no function. I started writing the internal report, as protocol required after a death, but I froze. How do you explain that this loss wasn't just another statistic? How do you justify the trembling hands, the dry eyes, the sudden nausea while typing his name into a file? The solution was simple. I lied, wrote a technical, clean, emotionless report, just like the manual says. And I signed it with the same hand that, just days before, had stroked his face one last time. From that point on, I moved on autopilot, an efficient nurse, composed, respected, but hollow. In the mess hall, I ate less. In the barracks, I avoided small talk. In the mirror, I barely looked, because what I saw was a war zone. A scorched landscape, burned from the inside, no smoke, no troops, but still fighting. I started having stomach pains, palpitations, chronic nausea. They called it acute operational stress. But the real name was something else. Clandestine grief. There was no room for that kind of pain on base. Crying for a soldier was already frowned upon. Imagine crying for a son no one knew was yours. So I kept quiet, again, and sank deeper into that private war zone. No trenches, no flags, just memories scattered like landmines across the floor. One day during a shift change, a young new nurse asked me, "Miss Lillian, do you have any kids?" The question hit like a bullet. Fast, unexpected. I paused, took a deep breath, smiled, and replied, "I've had more soldiers than I can count." She laughed, thinking I was being poetic, but I wasn't. Because after you lose the only one, you start adopting them all, even if only by instinct, even if only to survive. I kept caring for the young men as if somehow I could still save him, as if every bandage I applied was an unspoken apology, as if every heartbeat I helped preserve was a way of balancing what I'd lost. But the truth is, the warfield inside me never shut down. It's still there, full of shrapnel that reminds me who I was, and who I lost. And every time I hear someone say, "The war is over," I smile, a short, bitter smile, because I know it's not over. It just changed address, and now it lives in me. I received a medal, one of those that come with applause, a printed certificate, a satin ribbon, and that old smell of mothballs. The ceremony was simple, held in the base auditorium. Rows of folding chairs, flags on the walls, speeches filled with words like bravery, sacrifice, and duty. But no one spoke about silence, or about how heavy it gets when you carry it in place of a name. The medal was round, gold, with the crest engraved on one side, and my full name on the other, Lillian Mayweather. There it was, etched in metal, no mistakes, no omissions. For the first time in a long time, I saw my full name displayed with pride. And yet, I felt invisible. They applauded me. A general shook my hand and said, "For outstanding performance during the Southeast operation, nurse." The Southeast. A name too vague to contain the place where my son died. Outstanding performance. As if healing were some kind of efficiency test. As if losing a child in the line of duty were just part of the job description. I tucked the medal into my bag, left the ceremony quietly, wearing the cotton dress Rose had loaned me, and a rehearsed smile that hurt more than any physical wound. Colleagues came to congratulate me. Some said I was an inspiration. Others, that they wanted to be like me when they grew up. They had no idea that for me, growing up had meant burying a piece of my soul and still treating everyone else's wounds with hands that trembled on the inside. But I said nothing, just nodded and went back to the barracks. I put the medal at the back of a drawer. There, between thick socks, a broken rosary, and a notebook of my grandmother's recipes. Never hung it on the wall. Never showed it to anyone. Never truly felt proud of it. Because, you see, my dear, the medal was for saving lives. But the only life I wanted to save, I couldn't. It's not that I don't appreciate the recognition. I was a good nurse. I worked back-to-back shifts, covered for younger colleagues so they could rest, learned to suture in the dark, stay calm in chaos, and recognize death by its smell before the body even turned cold. But no medical training ever prepared me to treat my own flesh and fail. No class taught me how to save a son who didn't know he was mine. The medal is heavy. Even though it's light, it weighs like a symbol of everything no one saw. Because behind that applause was a coffin I never carried, a death certificate I signed with clean hands, but a soul soaked in grief. Many times I thought about throwing it away, burying it with the letters, burning it in some ritual that would return my right to feel peace. But I couldn't, because deep down, it's memory too. Not of the war the world saw, but of mine, the one I fight alone, every day. Since then, sometimes I open the drawer, hold the medal, see my name there, Lillian Mayweather, and I ask myself, who is this woman? The decorated nurse, the quiet soldier, the invisible hero, or the mother who silenced her own motherhood out of fear, instinct, or circumstance? Maybe all of them. Maybe none. Once a young girl from my neighborhood, long after I'd retired and moved back to my hometown, saw me sweeping the yard and said, "You're Miss Lillian, right? The war nurse. I heard you even got a medal." I smiled, said, "I did. But there are things that matter more." She asked what, and I, broom in hand and soul suspended, said, "What matters more is knowing what you lost, that's all. Because a medal can be returned, but absence, that has no protocol." Another day, cleaning the closet, I found the medals box. Still there, untouched. The red velvet faded, and the clasp rusted. I opened it, held that cold piece of metal, and for a second, thought about pinning it to my chest, like they did at the ceremony. I looked in the mirror, saw myself in the old uniform, hair pulled back, eyes from another time. And there, behind me, in the blurry reflection, it was like he was there, my son, looking at me without knowing, without remembering. I closed the box, put it away again, and whispered, almost like a prayer, "This doesn't represent me, because my greatest medal was surviving. Surviving after what I saw, after what I lost, after having to say, 'Yes, sir,' with the taste of 'my son died' stuck in my throat." These days, no one asks about the medal anymore. The neighbors forgot. The newspapers moved on. The war became a chapter in a history book. But my drawer still knows. And every time I open it, the faded shine of that piece reminds me that not all recognition is justice, and not every hero wears a cape. Some wear silence, and carry in their chest a secret worth more than any decoration. I've always believed that some pains prefer the dark. They don't scream. They don't bleed. They just settle into a quiet corner of the soul, like a forgotten letter at the bottom of a drawer, or like a torn photograph tucked into the back of a Bible no one reads anymore. That photo, I don't even know who took it, but I remember exactly when I received it. It was an ordinary afternoon, after the burial. A crumpled brown envelope handed to me by a mail clerk on base. No note, no sender. Just the image, black and white, folded in half. In the picture, he was standing, leaning against a wooden post. Uniform clean, expression a little tired, a little curious. His hands in his pockets, and a smile on his face. The kind that doesn't know death is coming. It was the first image I had of him as a man. And maybe that's why it was also the last one I could bear to keep. I took the photo with me when I returned home. At the time, I stayed with my older sister for a while. She didn't know anything. No one did. In that house, I was just the nurse who came back from war. The woman who survived. No one imagined I was also a grieving mother. Without a funeral, without flowers, without a name on a gravestone. I hid the photo inside my Bible. The old one, black leather cover, a gift from my grandmother when I turned 14. It was the only place I felt I could hide something so sacred. Between Revelation and Psalms, I slipped the picture in. There, where no one ever looked. There where pain and faith seemed to understand each other in silence. For years I never touched it, but I always knew it was there. Like the photo was breathing between the pages. Like his face was watching me every time I ran my hand along the Bible's spine on the shelf. One Sunday, in the middle of winter, I found the courage to open it. The paper was yellowing, the edges curled. But his smile was still intact, and it hit me like a soft punch, because seeing that smile was like staring into everything I never lived with him. I sat at the edge of the bed, held the photo in both hands, and cried, not out of despair, but from absence. I cried for the hug I never gave, for the birthday I never celebrated, for the advice I never offered, for the scolding I never got to give, for the pride I only ever felt in silence. After a while, without thinking, I tore the photo in half. Out of anger. No, out of sorrow. Out of helplessness. It was as if by splitting that image I could finally admit I'd lost something that was never truly mine. I kept the pieces, tucked one on each side of the Bible's ribbon marker, separate, like we always were. I never taped them back together, never tried to restore it, because I was afraid that fixing the photo would create the illusion that something had been healed, and the pain I lived doesn't get fixed. It settles. It becomes like a second skin. Like a new language you learn just to keep surviving, among others. Years later, a church friend borrowed my Bible to find a verse during service. I saw her stop near the end and pause. "Is this yours?" she asked, holding half the photo, his eyes too alive for a soundless piece of paper. I gently took it from her hand, smiled and said, "It's a keepsake of someone who passed through my life like a good wind." She nodded, no questions asked, and I was grateful, because sometimes what we need most is someone who knows how to respect what was never said. That night I prayed with the photo pieces between my fingers, prayed like holding a sleeping child's hands, like rocking an absence to sleep, and I wondered, like I had so many times before, if he had lived, would he have found out who I was? Would that look in the photo ever have turned toward me in recognition? Would that smile have been wider if he'd known that the woman watching him from afar was his mother? I'll never know. And as much as it hurts, that not knowing is also part of the story, because some mothers have cribs, some mothers have baptisms, and some only have memory. The torn photograph remained, and every time I open the Bible, even now, I feel a chill. Because I know it's still there, between the worn pages, like a scar well hidden, but never healed. The other day, trying to remember the sound of his voice, I realized my mind was beginning to forget. But the image? The image was still clear, and that's why I never threw it away. Because deep down, that little piece of paper is the last thing that says he existed. You were, even if only in silence. And maybe that's the miracle of a photograph, to keep what time tries to erase. Even if it's torn, even if it hurts, even if it's all that's left. Every nurse wears a uniform, but some of us wear what can't be seen too. I, for one, always wore my silence as part of my apron. While tying the straps behind my back, tucking my hair into the cap, swallowing pain with tap water, the silence was already there. Like invisible fabric, like armor, like inheritance. Over the years, my apron carried it all. Blood, vomit, spilled coffee, the smell of antiseptic, and the faint scent of baby powder. But what stuck to it most was absence, because every morning putting it on felt like telling myself, today, too, no one will know. I spent my life being seen as the woman who helps, the one who rushes in, who soothes, who doesn't flinch. Even after the war, that role clung to me like a second skin. In the little town where I lived, everyone knew. That's Miss Lillian, retired nurse, strong, quiet, alone. Silence became my most faithful companion. It followed me to the grocery store, to church, to veterans' meetings. I didn't talk much, but I listened to everything. Listening was all I had left of motherhood. With time, silence stopped being a choice. It became a language, a way to breathe without bothering anyone, to exist without burden, to carry my pain without troubling others. I never told anyone. Not the other nurses in the infirmary, not the pastor when I came back home, not my husband, who was good, yes, but never knew the parts of me that weren't available. Not even my eldest daughter, who always wanted to know everything, and now helps me pick scarves that match my aging skin. I never said a word. Never dared. Because some silences don't belong to us. They carry us. And that silence was my home for all those years. It was the only way to keep walking straight without falling into a pit. My way of loving without invading, of grieving without destroying. There were moments when I thought about breaking it, writing a book, telling someone, asking forgiveness from myself. But every time courage crept in, guilt pushed it back down. I'd say, not now. I don't want to reopen wounds. I don't want to seem weak. I don't want to dig up what's already buried. But what we were never allowed to live never really stays buried. It lingers under the skin, waiting for a gesture, a name, a forgotten photo at the back of a drawer. With the years, silence became like pajamas. Something you slip on without thinking. Something you never really take off. And I settled into it, learned to smile with half my face, to answer with nods, to gently dodge questions. No, I don't have children. No, I was an only child. Oh, those old letters, just youthful scribbles. And every little white lie was just another layer of invisible cloth, another stitch in the seam of silence. One afternoon, I almost confessed. We were in a circle of church ladies, and one of them was talking about her son who had enlisted. She spoke of fears, of longing, of letters that never came. My heart pounded. My hands got clammy. I felt that old pain standing just outside the door. I thought, this is the moment. But it wasn't. Because when it came to me, all I could say was, I imagine how hard that must be. And that was it. Silence won again. Kind, patient, unbeatable. So, when I say I wore it for decades, I mean it. Not like someone wears a costume, but like someone wears their skin. Silence kept me from falling apart, let me function, gave me a place in the world. But it also robbed me, kept me from ever hearing Mom from the one mouth I needed, kept me from being remembered, from being called, from being seen. And now, at 89, writing this story that might never be read, I realize that silence isn't the absence of voice. It's too much love, with nowhere to land. Because loving in secret is like trying to light a candle underwater. The flame exists, but it never lights what truly needs to be seen. Sometimes people ask me what was left after the war. They expect me to list dates, battles, commanders' names, or how many lives I saved. But all I can say is that what's left fits in a box. A small one, made of thick cardboard. Inside, a stained apron, a frayed cord, and a handful of letters that never reached their destination. Also left behind, a torn photograph, half his face, half my story. A name embroidered in black thread, Lillian Mayweather, that no one ever knew to link with the word mother. And a medal that shines less than the look he once gave me, not knowing who I was. These days my knees ache when the weather shifts, and my coffee cools faster than my longing. But one thing never faded, his memory, even if it wasn't born in a family album, even if it only lived inside me. Sometimes I talk to him in silence, not like someone losing her mind, but like someone honoring it, like someone who knows some loves don't need witnesses to exist. Loves that didn't fit in time, but found space in eternity. If you've listened to me this far, thank you. Not for hearing me, exactly, but for letting this story finally breathe. Even if whispered, even if only today. Maybe you have your own silence tucked away, a secret you're still wearing without noticing, a pain no one saw, a love you never got to name. If that's the case, please know you're not alone, not lost, not wrong for feeling too much. Sometimes all we need is a safe place to unbutton our silence, even just for a moment. If this story touched any part of you, even the smallest one, leave a word in the comments. Not for me, but for yourself. Like slipping a note into an old box just to prove you were here. And you felt something. If you'd like, subscribe to the channel. Because every day, other women like me, and maybe like you, put on their secrets and tell the stories no one else dared to hear. And if you can, share this story with someone who needs to know that even the heaviest silences can find a voice.